Greetings, programs, and welcome to my review of Stellaris, which is a bit of a rarity on my channel, but Stellaris really grabbed my attention when Paradox announced they were going to release it. So I did a thing I don't normally do. I actually contacted Paradox and asked for a review copy, and they were nice enough to give me one. So what is Stellaris? It is Paradox's first venture into the territory of the 4X game. However, if you know anything about Paradox, you'll know that when it comes to strategy games, generally they've been doing it for a while, so it's a little bit of a new direction for them, but not completely without the realm of what they've been doing for years and years already. Now, the strength of Paradox games are really two things. One is that they are extremely replayable, at least the grand strategy ones, the ones I've got the most experience with. So obviously you start off the cycle, if you like, with Crusader Kings 2, and then you've got Europa Universalis 4 moving up through the ages, up through the centuries, and towards the end of that you're getting more into the age of imperialism, and that's when you hop over to Victoria 2, and that then takes you into the 20th century, at which point you're playing Hearts of Iron. And actually Hearts of Iron 4 is coming out in the not too distant future. That's actually next month. So every time you start off one of those games, you start with a fixed map, and at that point anything can happen, and it's different every time that you play through. That replayability is a huge strength of Paradox games, and it's why after many hundreds of hours I'm still playing the likes of Crusader Kings 2. So that's one of the things I would expect to see in Stellaris. Now, the other big strength is the kind of depth and level of interactions that take place in those games. Not just between you, the player, and the AI-controlled elements, but between the AI themselves. So you end up with this quite rich environment where there's all this stuff going on. And again, that's a thing you would also expect to see in Stellaris. However, on both these points, Stellaris, as it is at launch, really does fall down. And that's unfortunate, because this is not some unknown studio's first venturing into making a strategy game. This is not, for instance, I can't remember their name now, but the Argentinian studio, I believe it's Argentinian, that is making Master of Orion. And they're doing a fairly faithful recreation of the classic Master of Orion games. But they've never done a strategy game like Master of Orion before. They've never done a 4X. So some of the things that aren't there, it's maybe a bit more understandable because they don't really have the experience. And even so, I think they've made a reasonably fun game that's more at the kind of Civilization end of the scale. Paradox, however, have no such excuse, and this is why possibly I'm now, after like 60 hours of play, finding myself quite disappointed with the game as it is at launch. It actually, I would go so far to say, as it doesn't feel complete. Doesn't feel like a game that was actually quite ready to be pushed out the door. I think they could have quite profitably spent another couple of months working on it. So yeah, it's a bit disappointing, really. Now, I've had fun. I have actually enjoyed certain parts of the game. The early game, especially when you are just setting out, you're starting to explore, you're starting to colonize, that's actually pretty good fun. But once you get to the stage of all the different civilizations having gotten their place on the map, they've all got their colonies out, and the borders have started to run up against each other, at that point you start to realize that there isn't that much going on outside of just running around declaring war. And in point of fact, there are 2 victory conditions in this game. That's it. You've got a domination and a conquest victory. So you can either just wipe the map, you can conquer everything, or you can hold, I think it's 40% of the habitable star system, something like that. And that's it. So, although this is not maybe necessarily a new issue for Paradox games. EU4 certainly had this issue earlier in its life cycle, where outside of going to war or planning your next war, there just wasn't really that much going on. They have put in a fair bit of work trying to make the domestic management side a bit more interesting. Unfortunately, that doesn't really come through in Stellaris. There's just not a lot to do. Now, the other big disappointment for me is the stuff that just isn't in the game at all. And I'm thinking things like an espionage system. And I can actually give you a concrete example of a new player who was looking how to find out information about his neighbours. And I actually was then able to say, well, you can't. There's no such way of doing that. You know, that this whole system does not exist in the game. This is a guy called Many a True Nerd, who has his own channel, is doing a little Stellaris playthrough. This is his first Paradox game, and I'm actually a Patreon supporter of his. I kind of, I said to him, if you need any advice or whatever about Paradox games, I've played a bunch of them. I've played a bunch of this one. Feel free to ask. And he was, saying, okay, how do I find out what my neighbours are doing? How do I spy on my neighbours' systems? Can I build spy satellites? Can I put in spies onto their planets? And I said, no, you can't. So he also wants to know, can I see somewhere who's using what FTL technologies? And again, I was forced to say, no, you literally just have to watch their ships jumping around and see if you can figure it out that way. So, yeah, it's, I don't know. I mean, that's one example of the thing that's missing. There's no kind of trading system in the game. Diplomacy is incredibly lacking compared to other Paradox games. I've already talked about there's not really a lot of end game states to go for. So outside of declaring war, it's quite difficult to play peaceful games. There are a couple of forms of alliance you can make. You can make alliances, and then you can make super alliances, which are called federations. Except the game doesn't really explain them very well. And some of the mechanics are, frankly, they don't make sense. And the game, it's one of these things I can't figure out in particular. And this actually happened to me. I formed a federation out of an alliance, but not all of the alliance members joined the federation. And I couldn't figure out why. And I now cannot get those particular alliance members to get in my federation because that alliance still also exists. Did I do something wrong? Did they just choose not to join the Federation? I have no idea. The game has not told me. And in terms of the game not telling me stuff, this takes me on to another major deficit that, again, for a Paradox game is practically inexcusable. Not only is there no ledger, which is the kind of thing where you might want to go and look up, say, who's using what FTL technology or the various ethics of your different populations. And again, Victoria 2 is the prime example of this. This is stuff they've done in games before. Victoria 2 had a very detailed population information screen, but it's just not there. But the other, apart from there being no ledger, map overlays. There are no map overlays, and that is the thing that's doing my head in the most. If I want to see who is allied to who is in what alliance, same thing. Who is in what federation, rather, or what things are federations versus what other things are alliances. If I want to see who's at war with who, if I want to see population density or distribution of planet types, or I don't even know what other things you would want to look at, but you can't. You just simply can't. There are no map overlays, and for Paradox to have left that out, it's mind-boggling slightly. So while I've had fun, I keep running up against these walls of things that should be there because it's a Paradox game, and I'm absolutely biased in that regard because I've played a lot of hours of Paradox games. There are things I expect to see and things that are tried and tested, things that are in other Paradox games for a reason that aren't in this one, and I can't figure out why. So it's been a disappointing launch, and I think Paradox are aware that the game has come out with some issues. So they've actually already announced that not only have they done 2 hot fixes already, which fixed some bugs. I think they've fixed some Crash 2 desktop issues, which I've experienced one of those myself. But they've also announced a roadmap of 3 patches that they are going to get out in the coming months before they start doing any DLC. So most of them are bug fixes, but they're also going to add in some much requested features. They have specifically mentioned a diplomatic map overlay, but I really hope they add more than that. I mean, a Diplo overlay would be useful, but so would other things. If you look at the amount of options that you have in EU4, for example, just leaving stuff out, just having only one overlay, it's barely better than none at all. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, as it is, there are some very good things about the game. The emphasis on moddability, I think the scale of the game is good. 1,000 star systems makes the Master of Orion generated galaxies feel quite small in comparison, and there are already mods that allow you to actually have galaxies of up to 5,000 star systems. So you can expand that scale even further. And as I've said, I found the early game quite fun. I like all the references. It's got a lot of sci-fi influences. You can find little hints and references everywhere. There's one of my home systems, and I think it might be actually in the save game, which is in the background footage I'm using right now, where there's an asteroid called R2-3PO. There's those kind of things everywhere throughout the game. It's got that paradox sense of humour, and that's one of the things that just, like, you'll come across stuff like that and it'll make you smile. So that is definitely a plus. It's got a lot going for it, but there are just such major deficiencies at the moment that it really feels like they've pushed this game out before it was quite finished. So it's hard to say that this feels like a polished release. It feels more like a solid framework. It feels like 90% of a game where all of the guts are in place, but it's missing a lot of that final polish. So that kind of makes it hard to recommend to buy just now if you haven't rushed out and bought it already. Mods will plug some of that gap, but if you're interested and have actually held off up until this point, if you've been obviously waiting for my review, which is, all the opinion makers have clearly been waiting for my review to come out, right? Sure. It's probably worthwhile waiting until those patches, that roadmap is completed. And then once they start getting to the stage of announcing what DLC they're going to announce, release rather, at that point it might well be worth looking at again. But in terms of what's there and what isn't there, at the moment, I don't know. It's fun the first time through, and then you hit that mid-game and you start to realise there's not that much going on, and then you get towards the end game and you realise that unless you want to conquer the galaxy, or even just part of the galaxy, at some point you just decide to stop playing, basically. There aren't really any endgame goals to go for apart from those. And then when it comes to replayability, well, there is some. When it comes to setting up galaxies, for instance, you can choose from a couple of different options that really do make a difference in terms of how the game plays out. But I don't know if they make enough of a difference to really keep your attention. It's not going to be that dramatically different. It's not like picking a different set of species ethics will result in completely radically different gameplay, because it will influence the kind of governments that you can pick, but governments really don't have an influence on gameplay. And to some extent, the ethics don't have that much of an influence on gameplay. I mean, if you want to have a really peaceful run through, you can do that, but how do you win the game at that point? You just keep playing forever and ever and sit there waiting for things to happen, and it wouldn't be very interesting, to be quite honest. So it does limit the replayability, and you also don't get those little fun interactions that happen in other Paradox games. You don't get to see the AI doing occasionally weird, silly, fun things. You don't get to see unlikely marriages or alliances, or I don't know, things going hilariously wrong and civil wars fracturing neighbouring countries that you don't like very much, and you can enjoy that bit of Schadenfreude from, you know, that one country that always picked on you, and now it's all going down the tubes for them. So it's just missing so much that really would make it a solid Paradox game. At the moment, it's really hard to recommend this much beyond Master of Orion. I'm not quite sure what it does over and above right now. However, as I said, they're working on fixes, and given the history with other games and the way that the DLC changes those games, in a year's time, in 18 months' time, in 2 years' time, I have no doubt that Stellaris will be quite a different game, and I actually hope it will be quite a different game. It actually needs to come a lot further than, say, EU4 did at launch to where EU4 is now. So there's a lot of promise here. Like I said, it's a really solid framework, but if you're looking for a really solid, fun Space 4X, there are much better polished efforts out there. At least as the game is now. So I'll be interested to hear the thoughts of other people that have been playing, or maybe those that haven't been playing, that have just been looking around at reviews and waiting to see what people have thought first. I did want to get my own review out on the 9th when the game released. I was actually, however, waiting for some answers on a couple of things from Paradox, and indirectly they got answered by the dev diary where they announced this roadmap, but it would have been nice to have direct answers. It's just at this point I'm fed up waiting for them to come back to me with those answers, so I've decided to just go ahead and put out this video. So these have been my thoughts, but I don't know, new people out there who have been playing it in the week and a bit since its release will undoubtedly have your own thoughts on it as well, so I look forward to hearing them. So you can leave any such thoughts in the comment section below. You can hit the like button if you found this useful or informative. You can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.